Hey y'all, Wednesday the 7th, I'm giving another presentation for Thaddeus Russell's Renegade University. It's at thaddeusrussell.com/courses, and it's going to be about the whole dang terror war. So we'll see you there. That's Wednesday night the 7th, and you can buy it later too. Also, I'm going to be the keynote speaker at the Republican Liberty Caucus Convention in Corpus Christi, Texas, this coming Saturday the 10th. So if you're in South Texas or you just have a lot of airline miles saved up, I guess I'll see you there. All right, now here's some things you need to do. Buy my book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. Check out the full archive, almost complete, up through last year at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. The YouTube project, it's finally really a thing. youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. There's your archives for you there, going back to 2003, 4,600 and something. All right, and sign up for the RSS feeds at scotthorton.org and donate to the show at scotthorton.org/donate. $50 will get you a signed copy of Fool's Errand. $100 will get you a silver QR code commodity disc. Any $200 donation at scotthorton.org will get you a lifetime subscription to Listen and Think libertarian audiobooks. And I accept all different kinds of digital currencies too. All the addresses are there at scotthorton.org/donate. You can do single or monthly donations by way of PayPal. And also sign up at patreon.com if you want to donate per interview. That's patreon.com/Scott Horton Show. And anybody who donates $1 or more per interview, you get 2 free audiobooks from Listen and Think Audio. All the information is there at scotthorton.org/donate. Also, shop Amazon.com by way of my link. And give me a good review on iTunes or Stitcher or Amazon.com if you've read the book and liked it. Thanks.
Sorry I'm late. I had to stop by the Wax Museum again and give the finger to FDR.
We know Al-Qaeda, Zawahiri, is supporting the opposition in Syria. Are we supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria?
Well, it's a proud day for America. And by God, we've kicked Vietnam syndrome once and for all. Thank you very, very much.
I say it again, you've been had. You've been took. You've been hoodwinked.
These witnesses are trying to simply deny things that just about everybody else accepts as fact.
He came, he saw, he died.
Well, we ain't killing their army, but we killing them. We be on CNN like, say our name, bitch, say it 3 times.
The meeting of the largest armies in the history of the world. Then there's going to be an invasion.
All right, you guys, introducing the great Eric Margolis. He's the author of War at the Top of the World and American Raj, Liberation or Domination. And he writes regularly, of course, at ericmargolis.com. Spell it like Margolis. ericmargolis.com and uns.com and LouRockwell.com as well. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, man?
Thank you, Scott. I'm, as always, happy to be back with you.
Great. Man, I'm really anxious to talk with you about this, I guess is the word, something like that. It's horrible and everything, but very important, and your analysis, of course, is, basically can't be beat here. The Syrian Madhouse gets even crazier. So maybe if we start with Tillerson announcing we're staying in eastern Syria, and then that'll take us to Afrin and back to the zoo story we talked about a year ago.
Okay.
So,
right. Our Secretary of State Tillerson announced that the U.S. is staying in eastern Syria, where we have no business at all. We're not invited. We just barged in from Iraq, and we are now setting up bases in eastern Syria. He also just said last week that the U.S. would be forming a 30,000-man strong Kurdish militia to, quote, watch, unquote, the border. This made the Turks crazy because the Kurdish militias are allied with the Turkish secessionist movement, the PKK, with whom the Turks have been at war for, 20 years. So it's a very messy situation, and the U.S. is interposing its troops and bases and aircraft right in the middle of an area where the Russians are at the invitation of the Syrian government and where Syrian troops are operating. So it's a big mess.
So is it possible that this was deliberate, that obviously this was going to come to a head at some point. We've been talking about this for years. Geez, how soon till we stab the Kurds in the back here? How soon till the Turks go full scale after them, after we help them gain a victory against our Frankenstein monster, the Islamic State, that we've turned on now that it's an actual state kind of thing. And so now that we're at that point, it seems like the Americans almost were deliberately provoking Erdogan. Yeah, we're going to stay and create this mini state here, or consolidate it. They seem to be announcing, and then he announced it was over not only his dead body but a bunch of Syrian Kurds too.
Scott, you're absolutely right. So often, the Trump administration, I believe, has it out for, or has it in, whatever the expression is, for Turkish leader Recep Erdogan. He's a Muslim. They don't like him. He's too independent-minded. And the Israelis don't like him, and that's the kiss of death in Washington. So I believe very strongly, but I can't prove it, that the U.S. was behind the 2016 army coup attempt against the Turkish president, was then prime minister. And the Turks certainly believe the U.S. was behind the coup. And so we're in a very strange situation where our NATO ally is also becoming our enemy. And, of course, the Russians are in the background clapping away. They're delighted.
But so, do you think they just underestimated what his response would be to carving out this Syrian? I don't know. In other words, they're in the rock and the hard place where the Americans say, oh, no, Iran is the enemy. So now that we have this place in Syria where we happen to be, we're going to stay there so that we can pressure Iran and pressure the Assad government. And yet that place where they happen to be is this new pseudo-independent Syrian Kurdish state, which, as you said, is allied with the PKK, the Turkish state's enemy. And they know all that, right? So they just thought that they were just going to throw this in Erdogan's face and he was going to have to take it, or what?
Well, the guys who knew all that, senior State Department officials, have been fired. The State Department has been gutted under Trump. Hardly anyone has noticed. But all the people who understood the Middle East to a certain degree, they used to be called Arabists, have been dismissed, fired, and not replaced. So you have these senior politicians who know nothing about the area, but want to overthrow the Turkish government and see it replaced by a more obedient government in Ankara.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then, so now the Americans are just betraying the Kurds again, right? Because they're not coming to blows against the Turks. They're just withdrawing and letting the Turks slaughter the Kurds.
It remains to be seen, Scott. I think the U.S. is mobilizing and arming and financing this large Kurdish force, as it was doing before in the fight against this phony ISIS movement, which was started by the U.S. and the Saudis. And they feel they're useful. It's all part of a greater plan to splinter what's left of the Mideast, to carve up Syria into different little cantons. The Israelis are pushing this very hard because they would be the beneficiaries, and to keep Iran, which is really under American Iraq, which is really still under American occupation, keep them quiet, and to get ready for a punch-up with Iran.
Mm. Yeah, that much was so obvious. Even if you read the DIA memo, they're saying, look, you're carving out, or America's allies, it couches it carefully. America's allies are carving out this Islamist emirate in eastern Syria here, but the danger is that it could blow back into Iraq. And that was what Patrick Coburn was warning on the show, was that, hey, Western Iraq is not really ruled by Baghdad. They sort of had just been cast off and are drifting now, and it's wide open. The Iraqi army really has no presence or very little presence there. And as the Shia government in Baghdad is complaining, American support for the jihad in Syria is re-energizing the Iraqi insurgency here. And you guys are playing with fire big time. And we saw this coming from 2011, when the likes of you were very first reporting American intervention in the Syrian so-called uprising there, all the way through 2014 when they finally rolled into Mosul. I mean, just because it's 2018 now makes it seem like, you know, all this happened in a compressed time frame or whatever, but it sure was a pretty slow motion train wreck at the time, even as that DIA memo says. Like, geez, guys, we could lose Mosul and Fallujah. You didn't want it to go that far, right? And then the proof is no, they launched Iraq War III for 3 years to drive them back out again.
That's why I use the term Madhouse in the title, because the U.S. keeps doing the same thing over and over again, hoping that it's going to turn out right. It is complicating things for everybody. Iraq is getting ground down to dust. And yes, the Western Iraq, which is largely Sunni Muslim, where there was great opposition to the U.S., is now on the war path again, too. They're fighting the Iraqi government in Baghdad, which is a cat's paw of the U.S., and local collaborators. And the U.S. is buying or renting the local tribes there, as it did in past years during what was called the Arab Awakening.
Mm-hmm. All right, so now, do you know, I honestly am a few days behind here on the status of the Turkish invasion of this enclave, as they call it in the media, of Afrin here. So this is sort of far western Syrian Kurdistan, basically? Almost to Italy.
Far western.
As far as Syrian Kurdistan goes, it's the western edge of it, right?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And it's near, the nearest big city is Aleppo in northern Syria. Mm-hmm. So it's in itself, it's an unimportant place. It's just a farm town, but it's become a hub of Kurdish opposition, irredentism against the Turks, who are spitting mad and have now massed troops and sent their forces into Afrin. There's been fighting there, as you pointed out, for the last 3 days. The Turkish army will obviously take over. It's very strong. It has lots of armor and heavy artillery. But the Turks are moving very slowly and cautiously.
Yeah, well, and they're committing their Al-Qaeda allies, Obama and Brennan's moderates there, the Al-Nusra Front, who are fighting for the Turks, have been committing war crimes and posting it on Twitter. I don't know if you've seen it, but in fact, you might not want to look at it. I know you're pretty experienced in this kind of thing, but there's some pretty ugly stuff going on with I guess I'll go ahead and say, the disfigurement and desecration of the corpses of the women fighters of the Syrian YPG who've been killed by these Al-Qaeda terrorists. And I don't know, if it was before or after they were killed, what happened to them. But anyway, it's pretty ugly stuff. And so, but you think they're just going to take Afrin and hold it, or they're going to keep on marching and just kill as many Kurds as they can? Because at some point they're going to come up against the American Marine Corps there. Somebody's got to be coordinating this, right? The Americans are saying, look, you can kill this many Kurds, but not that many, or what?
Well, that's an excellent question, Scott. As I said, the Turks are being very cautious. I mean, the Turkish army could roll through there in hours, yet they've been inching forward and doing a lot of door-to-door fighting. They claim to have killed something close to 300 Kurdish fighters, and it depends how mad the Turks get. They're restraining themselves, but they are threatening to move south and squash any remaining pockets of Kurdish fighters.
Hey, people keep telling me, man, you got great show notes on your show nowadays. And that's all thanks to Damon, who's doing the great editing and posting of the interviews. So everybody make sure and check out, even if you're just signed up to the podcast feed, make sure and check out the entries at libertarianinstitute.org and at scotthorton.org for all the great show notes. He's doing a really great job on that. And now, here's the sponsors of the show that makes the show possible, so you should help to make them possible. That's Zencash, zensystem.io, a great new digital currency. It's also a secure messaging app and all this great stuff. You can read all about it, zensystem.io. And then Mike Swanson is really my best sponsor, and in two ways here. The War State, first of all, which is a great history of the rise of the military-industrial complex after World War II, and then also his investment advice informed by great libertarian economic theory. That's all at wallstreetwindow.com. And now when you follow his investment advice, which I'm sure includes in precious metals, and so what you want to do is go to Roberts and Roberts Brokerage Inc. That's rrbi.co, rrbi.co for your gold, silver, platinum, or palladium. And if you buy with Bitcoin, there's no premium at all. That's rrbi.co for Roberts and Roberts Brokerage Inc. And then, of course, get your anti-government propaganda at libertystickers.com. New art and a brand new website coming soon. And speaking of brand new websites, if you want a brand new website, a 2018 model, badass new website, then you just go to expanddesigns.com/Scott and you'll save $500. You know, it's kind of amazing that the Kurdish people at large are not the enemies of the Americans at this point. You know, we ran this article by Ted Snyder on antiwar.com last week, where he reminds us of Nixon and Kissinger's great betrayal when they supported the Kurds against Saddam. And in fact, the Kurds wouldn't accept the Iranian help and do their bidding without the American guarantee that we've got your back. But then when Saddam was really beating them bad and they needed help from Iran, the Iranians left them high and dry, and then so did the Americans and let Saddam kill, I forgot how many tens of thousands of them. And that was before we stabbed him in the back when Bush Sr. urged him to uprise against Saddam along with the Shia in the spring of 1991 after Iraq War I, and then changed his mind. Oops, Iranians are coming across the border. We better not do that. And then stabbed them in the back and let Saddam kill another few tens of thousands of them there in Iraq. And now here we are. And we've seen this coming for years, too. As long as we're helping the YPG fight against ISIS, that's surely just a temporary situation until the point it comes up against our alliance with the Turks. Although, you know, Phil Giraldi joked with me one time that, I don't know, man, the Kurds have oil. we might just betray the Turks. They're our best friends. That's the number one way to get yourself killed, you know? Another Kissinger quote. In fact, I think that Kissinger quote comes from him defending himself about betraying the Kurds. That, like, yeah, well, that's what you get for being our friends. When you're our enemy, at least you know where you stand. When you're our friend, you never know what's coming.
That's what I used, I think, in my last column, that it's more dangerous being an American ally than being America's enemy.
Yeah.
The Kurds, their motto is no friends but the mountains. And they're right. I have great sympathy for the Kurds. They are, as our president would say, wonderful people.
And Bill Clinton abetted the Turkish war against them all through the 1990s, too. I remember really only Noam Chomsky talking about that back then.
I was with the Turkish army in eastern Anatolia. I saw it. It was a brutal fight from village to village. But, it's a shame because President, then Prime Minister Erdogan of Turkey, had just about come to a peace agreement with Kurds, Turkish Kurds, when the war broke out in Syria. The American provoked the fighting in Syria, and that ended the peace talks with the Turkish Kurds. It's very complicated. Kurds make up, 17% of the Turkish population, and they're very ambivalent about the Turks. So it's a horrible mess. I have sympathy for the Kurds and their aspirations. But we've used them shamelessly with not a shred of honor, and it'll happen again. You know, the Israelis have been arming and supporting the Kurds since 1970 as a way of getting at Saddam Hussein. So this is an old story.
Yeah. You know what? Talk a little bit more about that, because this was a big deal in just, I think, the first year or the second year of Iraq War II was that Seymour Hersh article, Plan B, about how Israel decided, oops, that war that we recommended in Iraq and our partisans in America did in Iraq actually ended up empowering Iran rather than weakening them. That was stupid. I know. Well, let's just go ahead and go to Plan B, arming the Kurds and provoking Kurdish secession. And they've loudly proclaimed every time there's any sort of, they've had this referendum that they finally held, but they postponed it for years and years. Well, for years and years, the Israelis outright on the front page of the Jerusalem Post said, hooray for the Kurdish referendum, do it, guys, and have made no secret that this is their agenda. But so what's the big deal there?
Well, the Israelis are very interested in Kurdistan because they felt that there was first oil there, and secondly, because they felt they wanted to break the Kurds away from Iraq, thus undermining and weakening the Iraqi state, which has happened, and that the Kurds would become their allies, and that they could build a pipeline. There's been a long Israeli dream, an oil pipeline from Kurdistan right across to the Israeli port of Haifa, and it would have to go through part of Syria or Lebanon. So the Israelis have been working on this for a long time, and their big picture plan is to splinter the integrity of the Middle East and turn it into weak little cantons like Lebanon became, and they're leaving them as the big dog on the block.
Yeah, that's so funny I sometimes forget about that for moments at a time, about the dream of a oil and a water pipeline from Mosul or that lake, wherever it is right there, to Haifa, from under the control of the Iraqi Kurds, when they don't really control that land anyway in Iraq. And then also they'd have to go through, Sunni Arab dominated land in order to get it there in the first place. But this was part of, if you read, and Damon put it in the notes, how Ahmed Chalabi conned the neocons. And this is part of his pipe dream that he sold Wormser and Wolfowitz and Pearl, that, oh yeah, the Iraqi Shia, they just love being dominated, man. That's why they wake up in the morning. And so what we're going to do, we're going to give them a Hashemite king like in Jordan. And we'll give them, the king of Jordan's cousin or something like that. And then, and they'll just take it and they'll help us lord it over the Sunnis. And then we'll build an oil and a water pipeline to Haifa. And you could just see Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz going, hot damn, wowee, that'll be great. These idiots. Like, how could they possibly have believed that? But yeah, that's what they thought.
They did. That was a neocon wet dream.
Amazing. Just amazing. The unreality, and I forget if it's in A Clean Break or if it's in the companion piece, Coping with Crumbling States. They're both by Wormser, and they're both written for the same Israeli think tank there. They go together, really. And it's the one where he talks about we need to expedite the chaotic collapse in Syria so that we'll control the outcome in the future. And then he even says in there, hey, listen, and this is 96. So Khobar Towers attack, First World Trade Center bombing era. And he's going, well, it's possible that this will, increase bin Ladenite type terrorism around the region. But yeah, certainly these nation states are a much bigger deal than that. We don't have to worry about that. It's not that big of a deal. But he does acknowledge that, yeah, we could have a growth of those kind of movements if we go around overthrowing Iraq and Syria and fragmenting Lebanon and all the rest of their plan in there.
Well, back in, I'm a little weak on the dates here, but when Bush was in power, there was the active plan to invade Syria. And the problem was that they said after they take care of Iraq, they're going to invade Syria. But somebody with some brains in Washington asked the Bush administration, who's going to put in power? And they said, well, the only cohesive political force in Syria is the Muslim Brotherhood. And the minute these neocons heard the word Muslim, they suddenly blanched white and said, "Next plan, please. We don't want that." And that's why Assad survived.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting, too? It's just like when Bush Sr. balked at the uprising in 91, and then Bush Jr. goes ahead and implements it later. Here, Bush Jr. balks at the regime change in Syria plan, and then Obama implements the exact same plan in 2000.
Right.
Well, in fact, I mean, Bush did support the Muslim Brotherhood somewhat, according to that Hirsch article, the redirection, but nothing like what Obama did after 2011, that's for sure. And in fact, Hirsch himself told me that Obama's support for this coup is not even really picking up where Bush left off. This is a whole new program. Bush's thing was over long before what Obama started in 2011. And just for the audience's sake, I just want to say Eric Margolis on this show since, honestly, 13 years ago, 14 years ago, if you go check the archives, you'll find me and this guest currently talking about, well, geez, if they got regime change in Syria, who would come next? The Muslim Brotherhood? And this kind of thing, or me asking that question and him giving that answer way back, that long ago. And also, in the summer of 2011, Eric was one of the very first to report that, the Americans and their allies are intervening in Syria because he just got back from France where he was talking to all his sources there, military and intelligence sources. And so really on the cutting edge of this story all this time. And just, look, doing like Einstein, a lot of what Einstein did wasn't hard math problems. It was just thought experiments. Well, geez, if we don't have the secular fascist coalition of all the minorities in power in Syria, what do we have instead? Oh, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Well, maybe that's a bad idea.
Well, they couldn't find another strongman from the Syrian army who was acceptable. So that would be the normal recourse for the U.S. That's the U.S. The first coup staged in Syria by the U.S. was in 1948. Imagine that. So long ago, the U.S. cultivated a general named Hosni Zaim, and they put him into power. And in fact, Miles Copeland, who was the leading CIA agent there at the time, wrote a delightful book called The Game of Nations, recounts in that how they were cultivating Zaim, and he'd come over and drink scotch with the American CIA people, and they'd go, "How you doing, Hosni? You're a great guy, Hosni." The minute Zaim took power, the CIA boys came over, "Hiya, Hosni." And he said, "When you talk to me, you will stand at attention and address me as Your Excellency." A wonderful change. But we've been mucking around Syria since then and made messes inside of messes and in the process wrecked the whole country.
Well, Pat Buchanan likes to point out that Bush Sr. made a deal with Assad's father, and he actually joined the war in Iraq War I against Saddam Hussein.
I remember he was trying to curry favor with the Americans. He was trying to keep on America's good side, and it didn't work.
This is the important point, right, is that even it seems like from the point of view of the American empire, I'm trying to see it their way, is that, the Assad regime, they were never like Mubarak, where they were basically just a CIA agent, sock puppet type, right? But then again, they'd torture people for the CIA at the drop of a hat. As Robert Baer said,
right. If
you want them tortured, you send them to Syria. If you want them to disappear forever, you send them to Egypt. And so, and that was under Bill Clinton and under George W. Bush, that Bashar al-Assad tortured people, including innocent people. So I don't mean that makes him a good guy, but and one more thing there have been occasions, I'm sure you know this much better than I, when the Israelis were negotiating with Assad and were ready to even have kind of final peace terms, sort of in the nature of what they have with Jordan and Egypt. And the Americans have intervened and stopped that, which sounds counterintuitive, kind of, but, the neocons in America, I guess sometimes are to the right of the actual right-wing government in Israel. But it just seems, the point being that this secular fascist murderer dictator in the three-piece suit, we can deal with him, whereas it really makes no sense to me, really, to turn the place into total chaos, because we've already seen what the backlash and the blowback means. It makes sense to me, I guess, in 1996 for David Wormser to say, well, what are we going to suffer? A Khobar Towers attack every once in a while? Screw him, right? But if you're David Wormser. But no, we've seen all kinds of, since September 11th, but also all these different attacks across Europe, as direct blowback from the war in the wars in Yemen and Syria, etc. How can they think that this is still the clean break policy makes the most sense when the result is this much chaos? You know what I mean? Expedite the chaotic collapse so that we can control the outcome and make it our way. But that isn't going. The second part never kicks in,
Or else just bomb them flat, which is what we used in Korea and during World War II.
Yeah, and in Mosul and Raqqa more recently.
Yeah, Fallujah. It's always a favorite remedy. We've run low on bombs now. Since Trump came into office, the expenditure of bombs has risen by 100%. And so factories are now rushing to make more bombs to keep bombing the Middle East. Bomb the usual Muslims, but do it more.
Madhouse is right. All right. Well, thanks, Eric. I sure appreciate your time on the show again, as always.
It's been a pleasure, Scott.
All right, you guys. That's the great Eric Margolis. The books are War at the Top of the World and American Raj, Liberation or Domination. And this article is at ericmargolis.com and the UNS review. It's called The Syrian Madhouse Gets Even Crazier. And you know me, etc., etc.com and all that.